The night was quiet, too quiet for a human who lived alone on the edge of the colony. David, a middle-aged man who liked silence, had spent years living in this small cabin. Far away from the noise of the main settlement, he enjoyed the peace. The sound of wind in the trees and the glow of stars across the black sky. But on this night, peace was broken. A sudden noise came from outside. It was soft at first, like a whisper. Then a weak thump against the wooden door. David froze, his heart racing. No one visited him at this late hour, and no one should even be near his house at night. He slowly stood up from his chair, grabbed the small light from the table, walked to the door. The noise came again, louder this time, a desperate thud. Something was pushing at his door. Or maybe someone. He unlocked it carefully, his hand shaking when he opened the door. The sight in front of him stole his breath. A woman lay collapsed at his doorstep, but she was not fully human. Her skin glowed faintly under the moonlight, a pale silver blue tone that shimmered like water. Her eyes, half closed, shone with a strange violet glow. She wore torn clothing that looked alien in design, with metal threads that sparked faintly. Her body was thin, fragile, as if she had not eaten for many days, and her lips whispered weakly in a language he could not understand. Before she collapsed completely, David knelt down, his heart pounding with fear and confusion. This was no ordinary woman. She was from another world. For a moment, his mind screamed at him to call the patrol. To alert the colony guards. Aliens meant danger. Aliens meant trouble. But then he saw her shaking hands and the tears rolling down her face. She was starving, broken and helpless. Not a threat, but a soul crying for help without thinking too much. David lifted her up in his arms. She was lighter than he expected. Her bones felt too sharp under her skin. He carried her inside and laid her down on the couch. She shivered as if the cold was eating her alive. David quickly grabbed a blanket and covered her, then hurried to the kitchen. He poured water into a cup and brought it to her lips. At first, she did not move. Then slowly, her trembling hands tried to hold the cup. She drank greedily, drops running down her chin, and whispered something again, this time softer, almost like a child saying safe. David's chest tightened. He had never seen such weakness, such desperation in any living being, and yet she was alien, a complete mystery. Why was she here? Why had she come to his door, of all places? Questions raced through his head, but he could not push her away. He walked to the kitchen again and brought out a piece of bread and some leftover soup. The woman's eyes widened as if she could not believe food was in front of her. She ate slowly at first, then faster, until the bowl was empty. Tears glistened in her glowing eyes as she looked at him, her lips trembling with words she could not say. For the first time, David noticed strange scars running across her arms and neck. They looked like burns or marks from shackles. It sent a chill down his spine. Had she escaped from somewhere? Was someone chasing her? The thought made him glance nervously at the window, into the shadows outside. The night felt heavier now, full of unseen eyes. The alien woman tried to speak again, broken words mixing with her soft voice. David leaned closer, trying to understand. Finally, a word came clear enough. "Family," she whispered, then closed her eyes, falling into a deep sleep. David sat back, stunned. Family? Why would she call him that when they had just met? It made no sense, and yet it touched something deep inside him. He had no family left, no children, no wife, just loneliness in a small cabin, and now this alien stranger, weak and lost, had called him the very thing he longed for. Outside, the wind howled against the walls. But David could not sleep. He sat near the couch, watching the alien woman breathe, listening to her faint heartbeat. He knew he had taken a dangerous step. By helping her, he might have invited trouble into his quiet life. But as he watched her fragile form curl under the blanket, felt something he had not felt in years. Purpose. He did not know her story yet. He did not know her name, but he knew one thing: he could not abandon her. Not now, not ever. And somewhere, far in the dark woods, hidden eyes were already searching. The mystery of the doorstep had only just begun. The morning sun crept through the window. Throwing weak, golden light across the small cabin, David sat in his chair, his eyes heavy with exhaustion, for he had stayed awake all night, guarding the alien woman who slept on his couch. She had not moved much, only whispered in her sleep. Strange sounds that almost sounded like broken words. Now, as the first light touched her silver-blue skin, she stirred, her eyelids flickering open slowly. Her violet eyes searched the room, full of confusion and fear. For a moment, she struggled to sit up, as if ready to run, but her body betrayed her. Weak and trembling, David raised his hand gently, showing he meant no harm. "It's all right," he said softly, though he knew she probably did not understand. He brought another cup of water, and this time she drank slowly, as if trying to show respect, her gaze fixed on him, studying his face, his hands. His plain human clothes. David could almost feel the question in her eyes. Why had he helped her? He walked to the kitchen again and poured some hot broth into a bowl, along with a slice of bread. When he set the food in front of her, she hesitated. Her fingers shook as she reached out, her long nails scraping lightly against the wooden bowl. Then, as if hunger won over fear, she began to eat, spoon by spoon, each bite faster than the last. David watched, amazed at the way she ate with such desperation, like a starving animal, yet tears streamed down her face with every bite. At last, she stopped, pushing the bowl away slightly, her chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. Her eyes glowed brighter. Now, as if the food had given her some strength. She opened her mouth and tried to speak. The words came broken, cracked, but David leaned closer, desperate to catch them. Safe. Food. Family. She whispered, pointing at him with a trembling hand. The word family struck David again, hitting deep inside his chest like a forgotten bell. It was the same word she had spoken last night before sleep took her. He swallowed hard, unsure what to say, so he only nodded slowly. "Yes, safe," he replied, touching his chest, then pointing to her. Repeating, "Safe," the alien woman tilted her head, as if studying the word, and then she repeated it. "Safe," her voice soft. David felt a strange warmth. Like a fragile bridge was being built. Between them, she did not know his world, and he did not know hers. But for this moment, food and kindness had given them a connection. As she rested back on the couch, David noticed her scars again, faint lines running across her arms and neck. They looked painful, old, but also fresh in some places. He dared to ask, even though he knew she might not understand, "Who did this to you?" He said quietly. She looked at him with blank eyes, not fully understanding, then raised her wrist as if showing him invisible chains. Her voice trembled as she muttered a single word. "Hunter." David's stomach turned. Hunter? It was enough. To paint a picture, this woman had been hunted, captured, maybe enslaved, and she had escaped. He felt anger rise inside him, though he did not even know her name. Suddenly, a sound from outside made both of them freeze. It was faint, like branches breaking under heavy feet. David moved quietly to the window and peered out, but saw nothing but trees swaying in the wind. Still, his gut told him they were not alone. He returned to her side, his voice low. "You're safe here," he whispered again. Even though he was not sure it was true, the alien woman leaned back, exhaustion pulling her down again, but this time she did not fall into deep sleep. Her glowing eyes stayed half open, fixed on him, as if afraid he would vanish. David felt the weight of her trust pressing on him. He had saved her once, But now it seemed he would have to protect her from whatever was chasing her. Hours passed. Slowly, filled with silence, broken only by the sound of her breathing and the occasional creak of the old cabin. David thought about his life before this moment, days of routine, loneliness, and quiet. Now everything had changed in a single night. He had taken in a stranger. Not just a stranger, but an alien hunted by forces he did not understand. And yet, he could not bring himself to regret it. Her eyes, the way she said family, had already placed a bond between them. One he could not break. As evening drew near, he prepared another meal, simple stew with vegetables. When he placed it in front of her, she gave him something he had not seen before, a smile, faint but real. It was clumsy, unsure, but it was enough to make David's chest tighten. For the first time, he felt she was not just surviving, but beginning to trust. After eating, she tried to speak again. Her words broken but clearer. Crash, ship, fire. Run, alone, she said slowly, her hand tracing shapes in the air. David listened carefully. Piecing it together, she had crashed. Her ship destroyed, hunted, left alone. The story was still broken, but it was enough to make him understand her suffering that night as darkness covered the forest again. David locked the doors and kept a weapon close. He sat near her once more, the flickering lamp casting long shadows. She lay wrapped in the blanket, her face calm now. As if she finally believed she was safe, David whispered softly, more to himself than to her, "You're not alone anymore." And as he spoke, he could not help but feel a strange shift inside him. This was no longer just about kindness or duty. It was about something deeper, something that could change his life forever. But far beyond the trees, hidden shapes moved under the cover of night, and their eyes burned with the same words she had spoken. Hunters, the first meal had given her life again, but danger was still close. Waiting, the third night was colder than usual. And David added more wood to the fire. The crackling flames pushed back the darkness, but the silence outside felt heavy, as if the forest was hiding something. He glanced at the alien woman on the couch, still weak but no longer fading, her violet eyes glowing faintly in the firelight. She had eaten enough now to regain some strength. Yet her body carried the marks of suffering that food alone could not erase. David sat across from her, holding a small notebook. He pointed at simple drawings he had made, a picture of a tree, cup, a house. Each time he spoke the human word slowly, and she tried to repeat. "Tree," he said, and she echoed. Softly, "Teary water," he added, and she whispered, "Wah." Tur. It was slow work, but David could see the spark in her eyes each time she learned something new. At last, she touched her chest and spoke one broken word with great effort. "Liara." David blinked, realizing it was her name. He pointed at her, gently repeating Liara. Her face softened, and she nodded once, as if relieved that someone finally spoke her name with kindness. Then she pointed at him, her head tilting in question. "David," he answered, tapping his chest. "Vid," she whispered, the sound clumsy but full of meaning. It was the first true exchange of trust, names given like gifts. And with that trust came something deeper. Liara tried harder to form words, her voice shaky but determined. "Ship. Crash. Fire. Many die," she said slowly, her hand mimicking an explosion in the air. David leaned forward, listening closely. Her words painted a broken picture. Her vessel had fallen from the sky, shattered in flames, her people scattered or killed. She pointed to the scars on her arms and neck, whispering again, "Hunter. Chain. Run." David's jaw tightened, the truth becoming clear. She had not simply crashed. She had been hunted, captured, perhaps even enslaved, and now she was alone. No family, no tribe, no home. Yet when she looked at David, her glowing eyes softened, and she whispered the word again. "Family." The word carried weight. Not just sound to her. Family meant safety, trust, and belonging. And somehow, in only a few days, she had chosen him for that role. David felt his throat tighten. For years, he had lived without family, pushing through life with no one by his side. And now, this alien stranger, scarred and hunted, had given him the one word he thought he would never hear again. Still, fear clawed at him. If there were hunters, they might come here, and if the patrol learned he was hiding an alien, he would be punished severely. He told himself he should send her away, but deep down, he knew he never would. Liara seemed to sense his worry, for she touched his arm gently. Her hand warm despite her weakness. "Safe," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Safe with David." The firelight flickered, and David closed his eyes, letting the words sink into him. Safe with David. He had promised her safety, and he would keep it, no matter the cost. Later that night, he stepped outside to gather more wood. The forest was quiet, but the quiet felt wrong. Too heavy, too watchful. He froze when he saw a faint light between the trees, moving slowly, like a search beam. His pulse quickened, and he ducked back inside, bolting the door. Liara saw his fear, and sat up quickly, her eyes wide. "Hunter," she whispered, her body trembling. David nodded, pulling his old rifle from the wall. He spoke firmly. "They won't take you," though inside he wondered if that was true. For the rest of the night, he sat by the door, weapon across his lap. Liara did not sleep either, her glowing eyes fixed on the shadows dancing outside. At one point, she crawled closer to him, wrapping the blanket around herself, and sat on the floor near his chair. The closeness was not out of comfort, but out of fear, as if she could not bear to be far from him. And though David was weary, her presence reminded him why he would not give her up. By morning, the light between the trees was gone. But David knew it was only the beginning. The hunters would not stop. He turned to Liara, determined to learn more. He pointed to the sky, mimicking a ship, and asked slowly, "Where from?" Lyra's expression grew sad, her eyes dimming. She spoke slowly, painfully. "Far. Stars. Family lost. Only me." Her words were few, but her voice carried sorrow so deep that David felt it in his own chest. He reached out and placed his hand gently over hers. "You're not alone anymore," he said quietly. She did not understand every word, but the tone, the warmth in his voice, told her enough. She leaned closer, resting her head against his arm, and whispered again, "Family." The fire crackled, filling the silence with warmth. For the first time in years, David did not feel the weight of loneliness pressing down on him. Instead, he felt the fragile beginning of something new, something worth protecting. But outside, in the endless woods, the hunters had not stopped. They were searching, closer each night, and soon the small cabin would no longer be enough to hide her. The secret of who Liara truly was had been revealed. But the danger waiting in the shadows was only growing stronger. The fourth night arrived with a storm. Rain pounded against the roof, and thunder rolled across the sky, shaking the little cabin with its roar. David sat near the window, rifle across his lap, while Liara curled up on the couch, her glowing eyes watching the door with fear. The storm should have been comforting, for it drowned out footsteps and hid the forest in shadows. But David felt no comfort. He knew the hunters were out there, and he knew storms could not stop them. Liara whispered softly, her broken words struggling against the sound of the rain. "Danger. Close. They find," she said, clutching the blanket tighter. David turned to her, his jaw tense. "They won't take you," he replied, though even as he spoke, he doubted his own strength. She stared at him with wide, trembling eyes, as if she wanted to believe but could not. Hours passed. The storm raged, and then it came a knock. heavy and deliberate, against the door. David froze, his heart racing. The knock came again, louder. Then a voice called through the wood, "Human." The voice said, harsh and unfamiliar, "You hide one who is not yours. Bring her out," Liara gasped. Covering her mouth with her hands, her body shaking, David raised his rifle, whispering to her, "Stay quiet. Stay down." He moved closer to the door, his mind racing. If he refused, they might break in. If he gave her up, he would betray the trust in her eyes, the bond that had grown between them. His hands shook as he shouted back, "There's no one here. Leave." Silence followed, long and tense, broken only by the storm. Then, the sound of boots in the mud, moving around the house. Shadows crossed the windows, beams of strange blue light scanning the walls. Liara crawled to David's side, her small frame trembling like a leaf. Her hand clutched his arm, whispering one word again and again. "Family, family," David felt. Anger burned in his chest. Anger at the hunters who wanted to take her. Anger at the fear they placed in her heart. He whispered firmly to her, "I won't let them." The handle of the door rattled, then stopped. Voices muttered outside in a language David did not understand. After a long moment, the footsteps retreated, fading into the storm, but David knew it was not victory. Only delay. When morning came, the storm was gone, and the forest seemed too still, too quiet. David stepped outside cautiously, his rifle ready. The mud was full of strange footprints, heavy and sharp, not human at all. They had been all around the cabin, circling, searching. David's chest tightened as he realized the truth they would be back, stronger and more determined. He returned inside, where Liara waited with fearful eyes. He knelt beside her and spoke softly, "We can't stay here. They know where you are." Her face fell, and her voice cracked as she whispered, "Run." Again, David nodded slowly, his heart heavy. He had lived in this cabin for years. It was his home, his safe place. But now, to protect her, he would have to leave it all behind for the next hours. He prepared, packing food, water, blankets. And what little ammunition he had, Liara tried to help. Her hands clumsy but eager, as if she wanted to show him she was not just a burden. She placed her hands on the jars of food, her strange energy making them glow faintly, sealing them tighter. Preserving them, David watched in quiet amazement. Realizing she was not helpless, she had gifts he did not yet understand. Still, he could see the weakness in her every step. The way her body trembled with effort. By evening, they were ready, 2 packs filled with supplies. David looked around the cabin one last time, his chest aching with loss. It was more than wood and stone it had been his whole life. But Liara stood at the door, waiting, her eyes filled with trust, and he knew some things were worth more than walls or safety. They slipped into the forest as darkness fell, the trees whispering with the wind. David led the way, keeping his rifle ready, while Liara followed close, her glowing eyes the only light in the shadows. Every crack of a branch made them freeze. Every rustle of leaves made them grip each other tighter. Hours passed like this, a journey of fear and silence. Then, suddenly, voices echoed through the woods, harsh and sharp. Blue lights swept across the trees, hunters moving fast. "They come," Liara whispered, her voice breaking. David pulled her behind a fallen log, pressing her close. The hunter's footsteps drew near, beams of light slicing through the darkness. David's breath came hard and fast, his finger tight on the trigger of his rifle. He knew one wrong move would expose them. Lyra's hand found his, her grip trembling but strong. Her eyes met his, glowing with fear but also with faith. "Safe," she whispered, as if reminding him of the promise he had made. The hunters passed, their voices fading deeper into the forest, but David knew it was not over. They were no longer searching blindly. They were hunting with purpose. When at last the forest grew quiet again, David and Liara rose, their bodies shaking from the narrow escape. They continued deeper into the woods, moving toward the mountains where David knew caves might offer shelter. Each step was heavy, but together they pushed forward. The chase had begun, and there was no turning back. As the night stretched on, David realized something had changed. It was no longer just her fight. No longer her running alone. It was theirs, together. Human and alien, bound by a single word, family. The mountains rose high in the distance, their jagged peaks cutting through the morning sky. David and Liara walked slowly through the thick forest, their packs heavy, their bodies tired. They had traveled all night after escaping the hunters, stopping only once to rest. Now the air grew colder, sharper, and the ground turned rocky beneath their feet. Liara stumbled often, her legs still weak from hunger and wounds. David steadied her, each time his hand firm on her arm. She would glance at him with glowing violet eyes, whispering softly, "Safe," as if reminding herself that she was not alone each time she said the word. David felt the promise in his heart grow stronger. By noon, they found a small stream, its water clear and icy. David filled their flasks, then watched in surprise as Liara placed her hands over the water. A faint glow spread from her palms, and the water shimmered, purer, cleaner. As if she had drawn sickness from it, she smiled faintly, whispering, "Good now." David stared, amazed. "You can heal," he said softly. She tilted her head, not understanding every word, but she nodded. Heal. It was the first time David realized that Liara was not only someone to protect, but someone who could protect too. She had gifts beyond his understanding, and yet she shared them freely with him. The bond between them grew with every small act. That night, they made camp beneath a cluster of tall pines. David lit a small fire, careful to shield the smoke, while Liara sat close, warming her hands. She spoke broken words, pointing at the stars above. "Home. Far, many stars away," she whispered. Her face was sad, her glowing eyes reflecting the firelight. David listened quietly, his chest heavy. He could not imagine being torn from one's people, hunted across strange worlds, left with nothing but scars. He wanted to tell her she would never be alone again, but he feared she would not understand. Instead, he placed a piece of bread in her hands. Smiling gently, she looked at the bread, then at him, before whispering, "Family." David's heart ached at the word, but it also gave him strength. As the days passed, Liara began to change. Her steps grew steadier, her voice clearer, her broken words piecing together into something close to real speech. She laughed once, a soft sound like music, when David tripped over a root and cursed under his breath. It was the first time he had heard her laugh, and the sound filled the silence of the forest with warmth. At the same time, David noticed she was watching him carefully. Copying his movements, learning faster, she helped gather firewood. She cleaned fish he caught from the stream. She even tried to mimic his way of carrying the pack, though it was too heavy for her thin frame. Each time she failed, she shook her head in frustration. But David always smiled and said, "It's all right." Slowly, she began to trust not only his protection, but also her own worth. One evening, as they sat by the fire, she reached out and touched his hand gently. Her voice was soft but steady. "David." Not leave Liara. The words were broken, but the meaning was clear. David looked into her eyes, glowing bright under the stars, and he spoke firmly. "I won't leave." She smiled then, a true smile, the kind that carried hope. It was fragile, but it was real. Yet even in their small moments of peace, the shadow of danger remained. David often spotted signs in the forest: broken branches, strange footprints, faint marks burned into the ground. The hunters were still searching, closing the distance little by little one night. He heard their distant voices echoing through the mountains, sharp and cruel. Liara froze at the sound, pressing close to him, whispering, "Hunter." Over and over, David wrapped his arm around her shoulders, holding her tight. "They won't take you." He promised again, though fear gnawed at him. The bond of trust grew deeper with each passing day. They were no longer just man and alien woman. They were companions. Bound by survival and something stronger than fear, David realized he no longer thought of her as a stranger, but as family. She had filled the empty spaces in his life, giving him purpose and meaning he had long lost. And for Liara, who had lost everything, David was no longer just a protector. He was hope itself, but trust came with a price. One night, as the fire burned low, Liara finally spoke a truth she had been holding back. Her broken words came slowly, but they cut deep. "If catch, they kill, not just me." "You too," she whispered, her eyes full of sorrow. David's chest tightened, but he did not look away. He took her hand, firm and steady, and said, "Then they'll have to go through me first." Liara's eyes filled with tears, and she whispered once more, "Family." Before resting her head against his shoulder, the fire crackled. The stars shone above. And though hunters moved closer with each passing day, David and Liara had something stronger than fear. They had trust. And trust gave them the courage to face whatever came next. The sixth night in the mountains was restless. The fire burned low. The wind howled through the tall pines. And David sat awake with his rifle across his knees. Liara lay nearby, her violet eyes half closed, but never fully asleep. She could sense it too, the storm of danger that was coming closer. For days they had seen the signs: scorched trees, strange symbols burned into rocks, the smell of smoke from camps that were not theirs. The hunters were closing in, step by step. David knew there would be no more running. Soon they would have to fight. That evening, as the sky turned dark and red with sunset, David began preparing. He checked his ammunition, only a few rounds left. He sharpened the old hunting knife he carried at his belt. He set traps around the camp, thin wires, sharpened stakes. Anything that might slow the hunters. Liara watched him quietly, her face pale with fear. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling. "David, may come." "Many." David nodded, his jaw hard. "Then we fight." Liara shook her head, tears in her glowing eyes. "No." "They kill you?" "Me too." David walked to her, placing his hands on her shoulders, firm but gentle. "Listen, Liara," he said slowly. "I promised you safety. I promised you family. I won't let them take that away." Her lips trembled, and she whispered the word again, "family," pressing her forehead to his chest. The night grew darker, and the first sounds came. Voices in the distance, harsh and sharp, speaking in a tongue David could not understand. Blue lights flashed through the trees. Sweeping like knives across the forest, David took a deep breath, his heart pounding. "It's time," he whispered. The first hunter stepped into the clearing, tall and armored, its weapon glowing with strange energy. Behind it came two more, their eyes burning bright in the shadows. David raised his rifle and fired, the shot echoing like thunder. The first hunter fell, but the others moved quickly, firing back, their blasts cutting into the trees. Liara cried out, covering her ears as the ground shook. David pulled her down behind a log, firing again, his hands steady even as fear surged in his chest. The hunters advanced, their weapons tearing through wood and stone. David fought with every round he had, each shot forcing them back, but his bullets ran out fast. When the rifle clicked empty, he drew his knife, ready for the end, but Liara stepped forward, her body glowing with a strange light. Her hands rose, and a wave of energy burst from her palms, striking the hunters like lightning. They staggered, their weapons falling, their armor cracking under the force. David stared in shock. He had known she was different, but he had never seen such power. Lyra's face twisted with pain, every burst of energy weakening her, yet she kept going, protecting him with everything she had. "Family," she cried. Out, her voice breaking as another wave of light shot from her hands. The hunters regrouped, shouting in their alien tongue. One rushed forward, striking Liara across the chest with the butt of its weapon. She collapsed to the ground, gasping, her glow fading. David roared with rage. Leaping forward with his knife, he drove the blade into the hunter's neck, pulling it free as the creature fell. Blood sprayed, mixing with the rain now pouring from the sky. The last of the hunters raised its weapon, aiming at David, but Liara, weak and trembling, lifted her hand one final time. A blast of light burst from her palm, striking the hunter square in the chest. It screamed and fell, armor cracking, body smoking. Silence filled the clearing, broken only by the sound of rain and Liora's shallow breaths. David dropped to his knees beside her, his hands shaking as he tried to lift her up. Her body was cold, her skin pale, her violet eyes dim. "No, stay with me," he begged, his voice breaking. She touched his cheek weakly, whispering, "David, safe." Family tears burned in his eyes, falling freely as he held her close. "You saved me," he whispered, "but don't leave me now." Her glowing eyes flickered, struggling to stay open. "I fight for family," she said, before her. Body went limp in his arms. David held her tighter, refusing to believe she was gone. The camp around them was ruined. The fire burned low. Bodies of hunters lay scattered in the mud. The cabin he once called home was far behind him, destroyed. But here, in the middle of the storm, he had found something greater than home. David pressed his forehead to hers, his voice steady even through the tears. "You're not alone, Liara. I won't let you be alone." He lifted her carefully, carrying her in his arms as the rain poured harder. Her faint breath brushed against his neck, weak but still alive. She was not gone, not yet. The battle had been won, but the war was not over. The hunters would return, stronger, more furious than before. But David no longer feared them. He had fought beside her. He had seen her strength. And he knew together they could stand against anything. The last stand was not the end, but the beginning of something greater. The rain slowed by morning, leaving the forest quiet and heavy with mist. David walked through the trees with Liara in his arms, her body light as if the storm had taken all her strength. Her violet eyes flickered open every now and then, weak but still alive, each time. She looked at him, whispering the same word, family. Before drifting back into silence, David's heart ached with every step. He had fought, bled, and nearly died. But he refused to give her up. The hunters had fallen behind, their bodies left in the clearing. Yet David knew more would come. He needed shelter, somewhere hidden, somewhere safe. At last, he found a cave carved into the side of the mountain, dark and deep. He carried Liara inside, laying her gently on a bed of moss, covering her with his cloak. The cave was cold, but it offered safety. David built a small fire at the entrance. The smoke slipping into the mist, he boiled water, added herbs from his pack, and pressed the cup to her lips. She drank slowly, her glowing eyes watching him with trust. When she finished, she whispered weakly, "David, safe," and then rested her head again. Days passed in that cave. David cared for her, feeding her, keeping her warm, guarding the entrance every night with his rifle ready. Liara grew stronger, little by little, her glow returning, her voice less broken. She began to sit up, to walk short steps, to smile faintly when he brought her food. Each small sign of recovery filled David with hope. During those days, something else grew between them. They spoke more, their words still broken, but filled with meaning. David taught her human words, pointing at things: fire, stone, sky, she learned quickly, repeating after him. Her voice soft but determined. One night, she pointed at herself and said clearly, Liara, then pointed at him, David, and then touched her chest and whispered, family. The way she said it made David's eyes sting with tears. In return, Liara shared small parts of her world. She spoke of a sky filled with twin suns, of great forests where her people once lived, of laughter and music now lost. Her voice trembled when she spoke of loss, but when she looked at him, she smiled as if finding something new. David listened, his chest heavy with sorrow, but also filled with pride. She had survived so much, and yet she could still smile. One evening, as the fire burned low, Liara sat beside him, closer than ever before. She placed her hand over his and whispered, David, no alone. Liara, no alone. Her words were broken, but clear enough to make his heart swell. For years, he had lived without family, and now, in the middle of a wild mountain, he had found one. But peace did not last forever. One morning, the distant echo of voices reached the cave, harsh and cold. The hunters had returned, searching the mountains. David and Liara looked at each other. No words needed. They knew danger was still near. David prepared again, his rifle in hand, but Liara shook her head, her glowing eyes steady. No fight. No more blood, she whispered. Instead, she placed her palms on the cave wall, her body glowing softly. The stone shimmered, the air bent, and suddenly the entrance seemed to vanish. Hidden under an illusion of rock, David stared in wonder. As Liara slumped back, exhausted, safe, she whispered, her power fading. The hunters passed by that day, their voices echoing outside, but none entered. The cave remained hidden. Silent, unseen, David wrapped Liara in his arms, whispering softly, you saved us again. She smiled faintly, whispering, family. Always, before closing her eyes to rest, time passed, the hunters gave up, and the mountains grew quiet once more. David and Liara stayed in the cave, turning it into a home. He built shelves of stone. She grew small glowing plants from the soil. Together, they made something new. Something that was neither his world nor hers, but theirs. At night, they sat by the fire, speaking in simple words, sometimes laughing, sometimes silent, but always together. For David, loneliness was no longer his companion. For Liara, fear was no longer her shadow. They had found something rare. Something both had lost: family. One night, under the stars outside the cave, Liara stood close to him, her glowing hand resting on his chest. David strong. David kind, she whispered, her eyes shining. He smiled, touching her hand. And you, Liara, are my family. Her smile widened, brighter than the stars above. In that moment, the pain of the past faded, replaced by hope for the future. The war was not over. The hunters might return someday. But David no longer feared what was coming, because now he knew he would not face it alone. He had chosen to protect, to care, to love, and in doing so, he had turned a starving alien woman into something more than a stranger. He had turned her into family.